Welcome to Speak from the Body, a podcast that seeks to explore the wealth of wisdom of the body. My name is Avni Trivedi, and I'm your host, as well as an osteopath, doula, and movement teacher. In this podcast, I speak to experts about all sorts of topics to do with the body, such as touch, trauma, body confidence, gratitude, birth, movement, relaxation, and baby development. My wish is that you learn how to connect with, listen to, and respect your body. Today I'm speaking to Darryl Edwards. Darryl is a natural lifestyle educator, movement coach, nutritionist, and creator of the Primal Play Method. Darryl developed the Primal Play methodology to inspire others to have fun whilst getting healthier, fitter, and stronger. After almost 2 decades working as a technologist in investment banking, he transformed his own health. Darryl now addresses obesity and other chronic lifestyle diseases as a keynote and motivational speaker. Darryl is the author of several award-winning books, including Paleo Fitness and Animal Moves. His work has been published in titles such as Men's Health, Women's Health, Elle Magazine, and he's featured on the BBC TV documentaries Eat to Live Forever and Doctor in the House. His TED Talk, Why Working Out Isn't Working Out, addresses the issues with sedentary lifestyles and why many people don't like to exercise even if they know they should. I'd like to welcome Darryl to the podcast. Hi, Darryl.
Hi, Avni. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. I wanted to start by a quote that you mentioned in your TED Talk, which I'll obviously share a link to, that in the UK, 75% of children spend less time outside than prison inmates.
Yes.
And that, when I watched that, it just made my heart sink of what kids are missing out on if they're missing that connection with the outside world. And it's particularly striking right now because it's lockdown and it's winter and there's a lot less outside time. What do you see as the most problematic things that arise from so much more time indoors?
Well, especially for children. So one is that 75% figure was in relation to pre-lockdown activity. So that's sort of 2 or 3 years old based on that research. So it's obviously far worse now. And the issues that come about by that are not just based on that 75%, but the sort of transition to that 75%. So if you went back a generation ago, that certainly wouldn't be anywhere near the case. There'd be far more outdoor activity for children than prison inmates by, a significant factor. And part of that problem means not only are children less physically able and capable than they were a generation ago, not only are there considerably more mental health issues for children now than previously, but also there's a significant issue with emotional development and managing stress and being aware of risk and managing risk. And a larger part of that problem is because of basically parental overbearing parents and societal changes, meaning that, health and safety is paramount, but to the point of being too cautious and kind of micromanaging children in all situations. And the loss of children's abilities to make their own decisions when it comes to free play, that's probably the biggest problem out of everything that I've just mentioned. So unsupervised free play has been pushed to one side, and now we have many more structured activities, parent-led, adult-led activities for children, which seems like such a much better idea. Like, oh my goodness, my children have so many more options available to them now than when I was a kid. But many of those activities are actually almost like a refined version of what they should be doing. So it's almost like analogous to processed food. So we've gone from a, organic, sort of food environment, real food environment for movement for kids, to a highly processed, refined, dumbed down version of movement activities for children. And so because of that, we can see the differences in terms of physical health, mental health, and emotional health for children. So yeah, I'm deeply concerned about that, because not only are our children being exposed to this, and even the previous generation being exposed to this, but they too themselves, when they become parents, will be kind of exacerbating this situation. So they'll know no better. They'll be teaching their children to navigate the world in a similar fashion, I fear. And so that 75% is certainly close to 100% now during lockdown. But I think that was only going to be happening anyway. I think we're only going to see that number increasing over time, because there is no significant shift in societal demand to make that happen, to increase free range activities for children. I can't see that happening in the short term. So yeah, I'm very concerned about that, and researching all of those areas. So on emotional health and emotional intelligence, on mental health, on physical health. I mean, there were studies comparing the slowest in 1975. The slowest children in a 1 mile race would be the fastest children of today. And that fastest children of today, that was in the 1990s. So it was worse in 2008 when the study was repeated.
Pre-iPhones and all of those things.
Yeah. So it's like, that's incredible. Heart health has declined significantly. Aerobic fitness has declined. Grip strength, so the ability for children to support themselves on a bar, the length of time has halved that a 10-year-old could support themselves on a bar, for example, within that time frame. So there are issues with strength and functional capability, issues with heart health, diabetes and cardiovascular disease is now being evidenced in children, sort of pre-teens. The very youngest of children are now starting to present evidence of type 2 diabetes and heart disease, which certainly has never been the case before. So I could talk about the issues for our kids at length. And we really are setting up it's like a living time bomb, I suppose. We're really setting up our children for a lifetime of sedentary activity, because most of these behaviors, most of the habits in our relation to physical activity do tend to start when we're children and modeled by the parents and our peers. And so if our environment is more sedentary, we're likely to continue that. And unfortunately, most of the benefits occur the earlier we can have this relationship with physical activity and hopefully maintain that throughout our lives.
I wonder, do you have any particular thoughts on the education system in terms of movement? Because, say, when I was at school, PE was something I didn't enjoy, and it was done a few times a week, but it was something to endure, rather than what I think of as integrating learning and movement. And, it's important for brain development as well. So the idea of even just having to sit and concentrate has never really made sense to me.
Yes. I mean, I have done some schoolwork, and what's interesting is that children are taught, in terms of physical education, children are being taught the benefits of physical activity. They are being taught about why it's good for your heart and lungs, and why it's good for your healthy bones and building muscle, and all of these factors, improving your health, mental and physical health. So that's superb. And I think the education establishments are aware of the benefits of academic performance and cognitive function, the improvements of concentration and focus for children if there's some movement throughout their day. And so some schools will certainly, especially in younger age groups, they will regularly have classroom breaks, movement breaks, because they recognize they can get more out of their children, and their children there's better performance, academic performance for children when they do have these regular movement breaks. In terms of the experience within a full physical education lesson, let's say that a kid is doing 2 sessions a week, say, 40 minutes. Let's say 2 sessions of 40 minutes per week. Then the kids have to get changed. Then there's a talk about what they're going to do. Then there's a supervision around what they're doing. And so if you measure and monitor how much physical activity they're getting, it's not very much within that 40-minute time frame when you take all those factors into account. And it's like, okay, Johnny, you go and do such and such now, and let's see how you get on. Let's coach you how to do this. Okay, Jane, you're next, and so on. There isn't that much movement necessarily in those classes. So that's a problem. And then thirdly, as you say, for some children, the experience of those type of sessions, those classes are not great ones. If you're not physically gifted, if you're not the person who's picked first for the team, who's celebrated, oh, look how good, they are at doing that task. Kids, you need to be just like he or her, just like them. So some people are like, oh, I don't really enjoy this. I'm not looking forward to PE. It's not something that I'm excited about doing. But unlike in my day, if I hated PE, I probably still got enough enjoyment from movement outside of school. So I came home, did my homework, then went out to play with my friends during the summer holidays. The summer holidays to me were pretty much 6 weeks of fantastic movement opportunities of get outside, come home when it's time to eat some food, and that was it, rain or shine. So I think the problem now is not only are the movement options available to us not that satisfying for children, say if you don't like PE, certainly not enough, because children should be getting 60 minutes per day. That's the recommendation, public health recommendations for physical activity, a minimum of 60 minutes a day, a minimum. If you're 5 years old, it's 180 minutes a day, minimum, right? So many children are not getting either of those. So we need to think educationally much more about integrating movement throughout the day, giving children this brief exposure to movement, which is more focused on fun. Okay, hey kids, let's do something that for the next 20, 30 seconds just to get ourselves kind of re-energized and have a bit of fun and interaction with the other kids. And I think that's a far better approach. And then when they do have their physical education sessions, of course, some children do want to play sports. Of course, there are certain skills, gross motor patterns that we do need to develop. Children do need to learn how to develop, eye-hand coordination, and to learn how to jump and land safely, and to learn how to develop these functional patterns, movement patterns, which are really important as we age. And there's certainly a relationship between these physical milestones, developmental milestones, and cognitive development as well. So we do tend to like to separate the mind and the body as if they're completely separate units, but they're so integrated, they develop with a synergy that doesn't exist nowhere else. So that also is missing. This kind of physical education is just something that's for sport, or you do when you get your serious stuff, like i.e. your academic stuff out of the way. So yeah, there's an equivalence in terms of our health, overall health, and that certainly isn't evidenced in our academic or educational institutions. Interestingly, if you do look at, I went to a grammar school, and at the grammar school, interestingly, there was a significant emphasis on physical ability, on playing lots of different sports, on ensuring that our curriculum had a lot of physical activity. And I'm really pleased about that. When I compare what I was doing with some of my friends, I was like, oh my goodness, we're doing so much sport, and like, and of course it was kind of almost military sometimes. We almost had a sergeant major for PE, but there was so much activity. And I remember we had, our playing fields. I mean, of course, even schools now don't have playing fields sometimes, but back then we had a whole playing field dedicated to our school that was probably about 1.5 miles to 2 miles away from school. And we used to walk there at lunchtime, every school year. There was no coaches or buses or parents that would come to, that it was just like, yeah, you've got games this afternoon. We'd walk to the playing fields, and then for the rest of the afternoon, which is 3 hours, we'd be playing some type of sporting activity. And that was once a week. Then we would have our PE lessons, as well. So I think there are some schools who recognize the importance of physical activity. Some because they're trying to push for sporting excellence, and to be, that's probably the real reason for doing so. But certainly there was also this recognition that it is good for your health, as well. And it's important to kind of let off steam, and it's important to be able to resolve conflict, and it's important to see yourself develop along with your peers at different levels, and to be okay with that, to recognize that you can't be good at everything, and to enable students to shine in different areas by having this breadth of activities. So yeah, I'm not the fastest at the 100-meter sprint, but hey, I'm pretty good at cross country, or, I'm not too bad at basketball, or I'm pretty good at rounders, or whatever the case may be. I think that breadth of exposure was also important for me as a kid. And being a jack of all trades was actually quite enjoyable. Even though I really wanted to be the best, be picked for the team. That wasn't really going to happen for me, but certainly having exposure to lots of different things was made me more well-rounded and more capable, I suppose, and more keen to explore a lot of that outside of school, and when it's just about having fun. That's all it was about for me. So I think we certainly need all three levels, the 3 Ps. So for the individual needs to be aware of their responsibilities. And then, of course, for our children, that's not a child's responsibility. That's a parent's responsibility. So you've got the personal responsibility, you've got the parental responsibility, and we also have the sort of the larger purpose of society governing what is acceptable and what should be mandated for our children. And that's pretty much at every single level. There's insufficiency around that. And it's not blaming, this is not, people shouldn't feel guilty about this, because this has been a slow shift. It's been a cultural shift. This is a cultural change. Not people just become, I'm lazy, or I don't care about my children. That's not what this is about. There's just been this cultural shift over many years, over many decades, over a few generations, which means this is now the new normal. So the new normal means playtime can mean using a screen. That now is play for many of our children. Not going outside is okay, because hey, there's other things you have to do. And if you are going to play, we want to be involved in that experience of our kids. We'll take them to be coached and to do extracurricular activities. And that's the way of society nowadays. But we also need another discussion around, okay, what can we do to improve this, to achieve a better balance between, I don't know where my children are, to I always know where they are, and finding some way of having a happy medium.
Mm. And I'm glad that you talk about the societal aspect, because there are so many projects. Like, I used to volunteer at my local park run, and if a local community has events like that, which so many local areas do, that has a significant impact, doesn't it? It's not just down to the responsibility of the school or the parent, or that there's different points of access for not just children, but for everybody at different stages of life.
Yes, and I mean, I think they're fantastic initiatives. Park run, and you don't have to run; you can walk. But I'm probably more fascinated with, in terms of success, it's the sustainability of those projects. So I would argue that the success of those projects tend to be based on people starting, not necessarily continuing. And what happens is you get more people starting than falling off. So there appears to be this kind of swell of like, oh my goodness, it's getting bigger and more popular, but you reach a saturation point. And that's, I think that's an issue with exercise in general. This is not about park run, single out park run. But I think if you track park run or many other initiatives, community initiatives like this, that tends to occur. And a year on, the same people aren't involved. There are new people involved talking about how amazing it is. But 6 months on, you won't see those individuals again. And I think that's what we need to solve. That's the issue we need to solve, is how can we make these activities where people feel great? They do it, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, this is so amazing. Why didn't I do this before? I'm speaking to people, I'm meeting my community, I'm having fun, I'm with the family. We're going to do this forever. But actually, for some reason, we haven't. We haven't continued with this. And I think that there needs to be more discussions around the why people are not continuing, even though they've experienced something that's really positive and a significant change. They've improved their health. I feel better. I'm having fun with my kids, but they stop, and we don't really know why.
And you talk a lot about play and fun, don't you? And
yes,
that seems like something that, like, there's a seriousness of, you grow up and you become an adult and you have a serious job and you sit at a desk, and it's almost like there's an expectation that exploration is supposed to die down as you become an adult somehow.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. And even, so for me, for example, a park run would be probably the worst thing that I could imagine doing, a physical activity, because it's still very similar to an organized sporting event. And for some people, it works really well and it is fun, and recreational running is a big deal, and walking, are very popular. But I would say there is still an absence of true fun. That's what I would say. If you asked 10-year-olds, if you said to 10-year-olds, hey, you have an hour to go to the park and do whatever you would like, none of them, without the influence of parents or older adults, would say, we would like to go to the park and run for an hour, or we would like to walk around the park for an hour. No kid would make that decision. None of them would. Why? Because it wouldn't be fun for them. What would be fun would be, we can play in the playground, we can jump over logs, we can climb trees, we can, we can build dens. That's what they would choose if they had the choice. And as adults, we lose that sense of adventure and exploration, but we need more of those activities for sustainability, I feel, where fun is not, is an inherent part of the activity. Not, it's not, it wouldn't be, for example, hey, let's create a park run environment and let's have some balloons and people, playing, bongo drums and dressing up in cotton fancy dress. That's how we can make this fun. That's not what I'm getting at. It's like, as soon as I immerse myself in this activity, I feel wonderful. It brings a smile to my face. There's no grimacing, on my run around the park. There isn't celebration just at the end of the activity. There's a celebration throughout. And I probably saw this wonderfully exposed during the first lockdown, when the weather was great and you could only go out. One of the reasons to go out would be exercise. And my local park, which is my local playground or my local gym, I like to call it, I was expecting, when gyms were closed, I was expecting to see my local park becoming like a gym. And there'd be lots of boot camps, and there'd be lots of people running and doing kind of conventional exercise. But what was interesting was how many people were playing. So I remember seeing, for example, a grandparent. You know, she must have been in her 70s, and she was encouraging her grandchild, maybe could even be great grandchild, but she was encouraging her grandchild to climb a tree. And the grandchild was about 4 years old, you know, and I'm scared. And the grandchild, I'm really scared, Grandma, you know. And she's like, no, go on, I'm not even going to look, you know. She's just go ahead and do it. You need to do this. And I was like, that wouldn't have happened pre-lockdown. It probably wouldn't have been socially acceptable for like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that lady's letting her grandchild just climb the tree and there's no safety net and what would happen to her. So I saw quite a few instances of things like that happening, and children building dens. So in my local park, no dens have been built in however many years I've lived here. In the lockdown, there was a new den built every single day. Children going into parts of the park where no one could see them as adults. You know, you'd have to look for them. That didn't happen before. You know, it was like my kids need to be on my person. So there was less supervision. There were chalk marks on the floor. People playing hopscotch. Skipping ropes are out. Parents were teaching their kids like clapping games. It was like I rolled back to my childhood pretty much. And I was like, this is incredible. And I remember thinking, I want to speak to these children and ask them about this experience. And even that, you know, of course, you can't really do that. and a man just going up to random children, asking them what they're up to. But I'd speak to the parents and say, you know, oh, this is really interesting. You're teaching them. Is this the game that you played as a kid? Yes. And it's so much fun. And it's so much fun for me as a parent to be doing this with my child. And I've never done this before. Previously, I'd be sitting on the bench, because remember, adults couldn't sit on benches then. So adults had to amuse themselves. And the best part of amusing themselves was actually taking part with their kids, rather than just saying, hey, kids, just go and do something. I'll just play lookout. It's like, no, I can teach you some games, and you can teach, as kids, you can teach me how to become more playful. Wonderful. That was the best experience when I went out on my daily kind of play outs. And some of the activities that I would do, I was starting to see more people doing. So I climbed trees, and I remember thinking that tree is always available to me. Previously, it was always available. Now there were kids climbing the tree, my tree. And there are now more adults climbing trees, and, you know, adults learning how to ride BMXs, bikes and skateboards. And there are adults playing music and doing and dancing. I was just like, wow, this is incredible. But as soon as the lockdown started to ease, the first lockdown, and people could start sitting down in the parks, it's amazing how those behaviors changed. It was so sad to see, you know, that people started doing the typical exercise routines again, and parents started to sit down and watch their kids play, and they wouldn't interact with them. And there was less tree climbing, and there was less hopscotch, and things reverted back to normal. So it's incredible how people reverted to fun when it was almost like, we've just got to make sure we do something that's really exciting, that's really going to be life changing. But they didn't decide to continue that. And of course, I can't say that as a blanket rule for everyone, but it's incredible how many people reverted back to the norm. But I'm hoping that some of that energy and the joy of interacting with their kids in a different way. And, you know, I remember seeing a mother playing football with her daughter. And again, there's nothing radical about that, but it was just so novel to see. Like, oh my goodness, I've never seen this before. I don't think I would have seen this pre-lockdown, and these parent, the mother and child, having such a fantastic time playing football, and this young girl probably thinking about, the England football, female football stars, and thinking, yes, this is something that I can do, and I'm just having fun. There's nothing that serious about it. We're just laughing. This is not about me learning my skills, how to dribble, how to shoot. It was just having fun. And of course, you fast forward on when these organized sporting activities would occur. And what did I see? The same mother sitting on a bench, watching her daughter getting coached, and she's on the smartphone. And I just remember thinking to myself, what's the experience like for that toddler now in comparison? What would she prefer to do? And I was like, I'm sure she'd be rather playing kickabout with mom than being told what to do by these football coaches. Anyway, it's that was the most fascinating aspect of the lockdown, when people are almost being told, hey, if you want to get outside, you have to exercise. So people were almost coerced to get outside to move because it was the only opportunity they could. And then secondly, people felt free to be able to go, there's more to life than just exercise. There's more to movement than just exercise. Let's just have fun. And the social experiment almost of, I think, parents seeing other parents doing something that's unconventional, it just became a cascade of like, yeah, it's okay to draw chalk shapes on the ground. There wasn't somebody demanding that the council came up and cleaned everything up, or, you're vandalizing, that would have happened, I'm sure, a conversation with kids. How can you be defacing the ground with chalk that's going to wash away in a few days? Let's call the police, let's call the council. So there was none of that. People walking on balanced rails, which I do quite a lot, and incredible to see. So fun is extremely important. The research tells us if you can make activity fun, and for me, I define play as not the activity, but the attitude that you have. So you could almost do anything and inject a playful state into it. And if you're doing that with others, there's even more of an effect in terms of endorphins and serotonin release, this feel-good factor being shared within a group dynamic and a playful dynamic. There were so many benefits over and above just the physical activity benefits.
And in your TED talk, you demonstrated that. And what was interesting is you could feel the energy in the room change just within moments. So yes. Whenever people think of like, oh, the effort of going outside or the effort of exercising, the effort of moving, it's actually just a shift, isn't it? It's not.
Yes, it is just a shift, and it can exist even indoors. So, when I've worked with families, sometimes I'll get, when I started doing my work, I'd get a typical, I want to drop a dress size type of client. I want to look really lean and jacked. And then as my sort of philosophy changed around Primal Play and the Primal Play Method, the inquiries that would come in from clients would change. So I remember the first time I had an inquiry from a parent saying, I love what you do. I just want to get me and my family to play more. Can you give us some ideas? And they didn't have access to a park nearby. They had a very small garden, and they said, our kids don't want to go outside, so maybe we need to start indoors first. Anything you can suggest? We tried board games, and so I said, well, hey, just if you want to start creating a playful environment, and the children they range from about 4 years old up to about 11, and so it was even like, oh yeah, my 4-year-old loves to help me with the housework. So it's like, bingo, start with housework. when your child is helping you make the bed, put some music on, make a dance routine when you're folding a duvet and you're laying out the bed, and make that sort of fun. Crawl down the stairs, balance on one leg when you're brushing your teeth, So the mother started to incorporate these activities and challenges for her children. And then the husband felt like he was missing out. So he would join in, and they would have all of these movement challenges throughout the day. And it completely shifted the dynamics, the family dynamics. And they were constantly trying to outdo each other in terms of ideas, generating ideas and other things that they could do. And so their children, rather than being kind of lethargic in the morning, like, oh, I can't be bothered to get out of bed, were very energized, and excited about getting out of bed. They couldn't wait to tidy their rooms. I mean, how many children feel that way, right? So they couldn't wait to tidy their rooms because they saw this it was reframed as being fun. Brushing their teeth. Can you balance on your leg for 2 minutes, whilst you brush your teeth? So rather than like, oh, okay, I've done my teeth now, done. They wanted to experience the two minutes because it was like, okay, can I balance on one leg? Why is this so challenging? Oh, look at mom falling over. I can do this. I'm better than mom doing it, So that was a fantastic real world experiment as to how even when you have restrictions in terms of I can't go outside, I don't have lots of equipment or access or resources, but I can change my mindset and I can make these fairly punitive activities sometimes, like, oh, the housework, exercise, incorporating more activity, and cumulatively, you're getting more benefits. So the more often you can break sedentary activity is more beneficial than having one section of your day of sort of like, 30-minute duration of physical activity versus 1 or 2 minutes spread throughout the day, totaling 30 minutes. That will be more beneficial. The 30 minutes broken up throughout the day than the one block of 30 minutes. So it compounds the benefits of physical activity. So there are ways to think about how you can move differently in a way that is still purposeful, because you want to get the health benefits. I do want to maintain good health. I do want to reduce the risk of chronic disease. That's important to me. This isn't just about fun. If it's just about fun, I'd be playing on my Xbox all day. To be honest. So there has to be more than fun. There has to be something serious about this. And the seriousness comes about by wanting to maintain independence, to reduce the risk of chronic disease, to maintain, my faculties. There are lots of seriousness around this, and setting a good example for my children and my family and friends, that it is okay to have fun with movement. It is okay to be spontaneous. It is okay to still be curious and to still explore, because that isn't just about movement. That becomes every single aspect of your life becomes fascinating again. It's no longer stale. It's amazing how much more interested I am in so many more things now because of that, rather than thinking I know it all. I was a computer scientist. That was my previous career in technology, technology and banking. I was like, I know everything now. I have my master's degree. I'm a computer scientist. I'm getting paid lots of money. I don't need to know anything else. I've already had my education. After becoming more playful again, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much more to this world that I know nothing about. And I don't have to be an expert in any one thing. I can just start to learn a little bit more about lots of different things. But that shift came about because I became more playful. I became more fascinated with the world around me and different points of view. And why don't I know anything at all about this particular subject? Even I've been watching BBC Bite Size, believe it or not. Don't have any young children. So, BBC Two happened to be on. I was watching BBC Bite Size and I was like, oh my goodness, it was a really fascinating episode. I've obviously forgotten that from my education. And I remember being really impressed what was being covered for a 12-year-old. learning whatever they were learning. I was like, this is really fascinating. This is really interesting. I'm probably going to spend some more time watching BBC Bite Size every now and again, rather than just assuming, what could I possibly learn from this? That's for an 11-year-old. But I flipped it, and I was like, actually, I learned almost all of that was a learning experience. Quite embarrassing to say, but it was, because I'm not exposed to it, you know. So that's been the transformation for me, actually, with Primal Play, is rediscovering my inner child, rediscovering kind of a love and a zest for movement, and recognizing that I can use this as a catalyst for other aspects of life. So movement, I believe, is medicine for sure, because it does pretty much cover every single aspect of our physiology. And the evidence supports that. But also it's life is a bad experience. And conformity sometimes works against that. As you mentioned earlier, we become older, we become serious, put those childish things away and become an adult. And we lose that sense of joy, that zest for life that you see in children, you know, like, oh my gosh, they're just like burning with passion for life. Like, I can't wait to experience something new today. Look at that tree that I've seen a million times. It's still amazing. It's still exciting. And then that passion wanes, and then it becomes like, oh, another tree. You know, there's no, the excitement has gone. The mindfulness has gone, right? And so we create mindfulness in a way that we try to program ourselves to become more mindful, you know, whereas real mindfulness is being lost in the moment. Children do that all of the time. They don't need to be taught how to be mindful, but yet we still have books on mindfulness for kids, right? That's how strange the world has become. We don't truly recognize true mindfulness in our children, where they are lost in the moment, where a second feels like a whole lifetime. They're just completely engrossed in an activity. And we still will say, no, we've got to get our kids to sit in a quiet room and be still and burn some incense and play some Enya and listen to dripping water and just chill. Whereas actually when they're being frenetic and kind of like having all this nervous energy, for them, that's mindful. Their imagination is working overtime. They're pretending they're being chased by monsters. They're like, you know, their visualization is incredible. That's mindfulness right there. And I realize that for adults, as an adult, I've also recognized that aspect of mindfulness too.
It's interesting you say that. So would you suggest that if kids were being exposed to more movement and play and exploration, they wouldn't need, like lots of schools are introducing mindfulness and parents are doing, you know, sleep relaxations and things like that? Would you say that that's less of a necessary thing because they're working out that energy?
I would certainly say so. I would certainly say that was the case. Yeah, they need to burn up that nervous energy. And so if we're saying the best way to energy expenditure to calm our kids down, then they don't have the true outlet. True valve is actually letting them express themselves through movement, because that's where their body's actually learning and adapting to the environment. So if we kind of dampen that, like sit still, don't move, be quiet. And yes, there are benefits of mindfulness. No question. But you can hit two birds with one stone. Mm. So the education comes when their brain is responding to a new challenge, to a new environment, when a child is learning more about themselves, more about interaction with the environment. That's how the brain develops. That's how new pathways have been created, right? That's how they're learning to respond better the next time they have to perform this task. And the more exposure they have, the more adaptable they are, the more resilient they become, the more able they are to deal with life pressures as they get older. That's the reality. And so sometimes mindfulness can be a way of saying, let's take you away from the situation, almost an avoidance strategy, you know, whereas I like to think of, if you ask somebody the question, what would the most mindful situation you could be in? And somebody might say, a Buddhist monk, in this shrine, and it's all peaceful and quiet. There's some bird song in the background, and that might be seen as the epitome of mindfulness. But I would argue you'd almost want somebody to be mayhem going on, like, lots of noise, lots of, and you have to make decisions, and to be able to make decisions with calm, with making the right decisions. That's kind of mindfulness right there. And so you can't just have avoidance. You have to sometimes be in the midst of this. And unfortunately, that's what our children, especially our children, need. They need exposure to as many of these external stimuli as possible. So one practical example of this is crawling, right? If children are crawl deprived, that's probably the best way of putting that expression. So if you stop children crawling when they're learning to crawl, and you go, no, get off the floor, put you in a walker, get off, it's dirty or unhygienic, I want you to learn to walk. If that occurs, children actually perform less academically. It affects their physical development. It affects their emotional intelligence and emotional development. And if they don't develop a crawling pattern by the time they're 12 years old, they will, one, never develop a crawling pattern, and secondly, will never develop all of those physical and emotional and mental cognitive development processes. So that's how important crawling is. And part of that is this kind of cross-body left-right motion. It's exploring their environment. I mean, that's the real benefit. It's the fact that they're not stationary and they're crawling around and they're learning about the world around them. So just depriving them of one movement pattern, crawling, has its significant ramifications. And there are therapists now who are teaching children of 10 years old how to crawl, where they've noticed this discrepancy. And they may be diagnosed with attention deficit disorder or being on the spectrum. And they're realizing that, actually, it has nothing to do with those official diagnoses. It's actually to do with the fact that they didn't spend significant time crawling and exploring. So yes, a long-winded way round of saying, expose our children to as much as possible in terms of movement opportunities. Because if you think about it, it's instinctive for them. We don't need to teach a child to climb a sofa, right? They will do it. That they're driven to climb, they're driven to drag, to pull, to crawl, to roll, to fall, unfortunately. But they want to explore all of these things. And of course, there are times when the parents have to step in to ensure that it is safe. But there are many times where the parents actually should be stepping back and going, this is actually okay. And this is part of the learning process, part of learning. Yeah. And everyone, I'm sure all parents have experienced a time where, you go on a play date and let's say, the adults are having some food and the kids are just rushing around and, running and jumping. These kids probably have the best sleep they've ever had. It's like as soon as we got home, they were out like a light. All parents are aware of that. And it's because that's what children need. The body's going, I now need to rest. I now need to sleep so I can create those neural pathways. I can repair myself physically and mentally. And you gave me the best prescription, human, by letting me release all of this energy. And all I want to do is go to sleep now, And sometimes we're like, no, you can't sleep now. You need to wait until later, and they're like, no, I don't care. I'm just really tired now. So yes, I'm not anti-mindfulness, but we should recognize the mindfulness that can occur, when children are really in the moment, when it's not forced upon them. They've realized this themselves, and how serious it can be. So, think about children playing sometimes when they make the decision to play themselves and they're not using technology or anything else, just themselves. They're not always smiling. They're not always laughing. There isn't always obvious fun. Sometimes it can be quite morbid. Sometimes it's about death and about injury and about, I've got 5 lives and I've fallen down this hole, and can playing hide and seek. I'm hiding in a cupboard by myself in the dark, and hopefully somebody will or won't find me. What if they don't find me? What if I'm here forever? We forget about this as an adult, actually, as adults. We don't remember that many of our childhood play experiences are actually can be quite dark, because it is part of it's part learning about the real world, right? It isn't all laughter and smiles. So yeah, when I think about some of the games that we used to play and, having 9 lives, and you would jump and there'd be a forfeit. Oh, if you can't make this jump, you're going to fall into that pit of snakes and you're going to be bitten, or the wolf is going to come and chase you, and like, all right, so you're creating this risk, you're creating this fear, and the excitement comes about by being able to deal with those imaginary scenarios. It's like childhood fairy tales. I mean, some of them are pretty dark, right? It's like, a princess being eaten by wolves, or, like all, like the Little Red Riding Hood, right? But there's this narrative is interwoven in childhood play. And that's why those kind of Disney films and fairy tales are so successful, because they do touch on those aspects of real life in a child-friendly and hopefully child-appropriate fashion. But again, children would explore that by themselves. They don't need that external input because they see the world around them. They're aware that there are things that they still don't understand, but they recognize pain. They recognize heartache. They recognize that things don't always go the way we would like them to go. And that comes out in play. And probably just to express that point, I watched a documentary about the war in Syria. And they were following a family during the Syrian crisis. And the children, one of the games that they would play was basically being outside and running indoors as fast as they could when there was a siren. So they would create a siren. They would make a siren sound, pretend that there was a siren, so they could find the quickest way to get back home. They would play in like burnt out buses and pretend that they were driving to school, even though people they were aware that people perished in this bus, family members perished, but they would use these play experiences to help them process what was happening around them, to deal with trauma. And again, we don't recognize these benefits of play unless you're a play psychologist who will use play as a way to deal with trauma. But kids do this themselves. Again, fascinating. We could almost learn more from children than ourselves sometimes. So yeah, I probably didn't expect the talk to go in this way, but there is certainly something really serious about play and necessity for play. And there's a reason why it's evolved as part of our nature, why it's part of our DNA, why it exists in the rest of the animal kingdom. It isn't exclusive to humans. It isn't just exclusive to those who would believe to be the more advanced creatures. Play exists everywhere in the spectrum of the animal kingdom.
Thanks for that perspective of play. That's so interesting. Yeah, because it's often the golden childhood kind of version of, just long summers and space and all of that, rather than figuring out life through play.
Yes, figuring out life, yes. So that's what they do. They pretend to be play doctors and nurses, right? I mean, they observe the world around them and they try to recreate it. So again, incredible. So they put pretend bandages on. Somebody's been injured. I'll look after you. I'll nurse you. I'll make food for you. I'll prepare, they perform all of these functions. I'll pretend to drive. I'll be a cop. You'll be the robber. Where do these games come from? Right? They come from life. They come from what they observe. It helps them to process. And even for myself, I am learning every single day far more about the benefits of play. Just when I look at my own childhood and I take I'm like, oh my goodness, wow, that's why we played those games. Knock, door, run. We used to play a game called Knock, Door, Run, where, a group of us would knock the door of someone that we hopefully didn't know, and then we'd run away. And even that game, and I've spoken to people all over the world, and they say, yeah, we had a version of that game when we were kids. Universal. Again, no one was taught. No one said to it from the other side of the world, hey, kids, here's a great game for you to play. It just happens. And when you think about it, what are we trying to achieve there? It's risk assessment again. What happens? Who's going to be selected to go and to knock the door? The other kids are going to be a little bit further away. What if somebody opens the door immediately? What if it's somebody who's fast enough to come out and catch us? What if they know our parents? So there were all these things going on in this game where all you're thinking is, oh my gosh, this is so fun. And, my heart's beating over time and I'm really scared. Let's get away from this. But you play it again. No matter how scared you were or how close you were to getting caught, it wouldn't stop you from playing again. And the worst case scenario would be you'd get caught and then your parents would be told, that'd probably be the worst outcome. But there were many games like that, and many decisions being made of risk assessment and watching other kids and going, I wish I could climb that tree, but I'm not old enough. I'm not strong enough to piggyback my older brother. But one day I'll get there. But maybe I can carry my younger sister. Maybe one day I'll be able to piggyback my mother. And I remember piggybacking my mother at a certain age. Maybe I was like 10 or 11 or something like that. I remember thinking I felt like Superman. I felt really strong. But I remember working towards this objective. So yeah, it's incredible how much of that I've been able to recall and recollect and recognize what was truly happening there. Why was I driven to piggyback my mother? Through play. I didn't know how heavy she was. It wasn't recorded. It wasn't a battle of strength. This was just an experimentation. Is this possible for me to do at my age? Somebody who's bigger and stronger than I, can I carry them? Oh yes, it's possible. I can do more than I expect that I can do. I'm aware that I'm getting stronger and older and so a little bit philosophical, but if we recognize the importance of play, and many of us don't, if we recognize that there are about 1,000 genes that change epigenetically after 30 minutes of play, there's research supporting that don't occur. And when I say 30 minutes of play, so active play, there are many genes which change just from the physical activity. But in addition to those, if you're playing, doing the same activity but playing, there's more gene expression. So there are more positive benefits that occur. There's more hormonal expression that occurs. Like there's more endorphins, for example. If you and I are playing a game together and there's eye contact and we're mirroring each other, we release more endorphins than if we were doing the activity ourselves, right? So our physiology works on the back of play pretty significantly, independently of any other mechanism, which for me is very fascinating.
Mm. Thank you so much. It's been so insightful. I have one very practical question, if that's okay for me to ask at the end. There's a picture of you or a video on Instagram of you jumping at the Great Wall of China and you're barefoot.
Yes.
And I've been doing cardio at home in quite built up trainers. So I'm kind of fascinated with that idea. You'd said in that post how with jumping, you can jump like a cat and really feel the movement. I'd love to know a bit more of how to actually move in that way.
Yes. So probably the best thing you could do is to ditch those training shoes. Because basically training shoes are meant to provide support and stability to reduce, impact. And by doing so, they also teach us to be less responsive, less proprioception in terms of how we respond to our environment. So rather than landing softly when we jump or when we run or when we walk, we can actually be quite clumsy. It doesn't really matter because I've got these shock absorbers on my feet. And by removing shoes like this, by wearing minimalist shoes or going barefoot, you become more sensitive to the actions that you're taking. So you start jumping differently and you start landing softly and you recognize the importance of maintaining good joint integrity. And I want to protect my knees and my ankles because I've got no choice now that I've got those shoes off. So I went through this process of having these really good training shoes because I had all of these issues with my knees and my ankles. I was always spraining ankles. I was always twisting my knees. I was an overpronator, as I was told, when going on treadmills and doing those kind of gait analysis. And I was always getting more and more expensive training shoes and, you've got to change them every 2 months and you've got to wear certain types of insoles to help you to stabilize the knee. The best thing I did is when I stopped wearing shoes like that and almost relearned how to move my body again, how to run, how to walk, how to jump, how to land. And so being true barefoot was part of that process. And as you see in that Great Wall of China jump, it's quite a high jump. And so when I'm jumping, all I'm thinking about is how I'm going to land. Most people tend to think of the jump. How am I going to jump? How high can I get? Actually, all I'm thinking about is how softly am I and controlled and graceful am I going to be when I land? And so, like a cat, like a big cat, if a big cat jumps out of a tree, stalking prey, as heavy as that animal is, you won't hear that animal land because they know how to control their body to ensure that they can have a soft landing, right? Humans, on the other hand, will jump even a few inches off the ground and we'll land like we're elephants, no control, just like a thud. And this is not a natural way for us to control our bodies. So that's part of the process actually of almost relearning and to remove these devices. A bit like wearing gloves, right? If you wear gloves or mittens all of the time, what would happen to your hands? They would atrophy. You would lose, sensitivity, touch. Things would become more painful. That's what would happen if you were always wearing gloves. And it's similar to wearing shoes. If you always wear shoes, then you lose touch with the world around you. There are more nerve endings in the feet than the hands, believe it or not. So there is so much communication that comes from our feet in terms of contact with the world. We're bipedal creatures, right? So we tend to focus more on the hands because, of course, we can make things, we can do things with our hands. But in terms of locomotion, our feet are the most important devices we have because that's where we are in contact with the ground. They're even more important than the eyes because our feet never lie, actually, because that's what's in contact with the ground. We know that it's not safe, based on our contact with the feet. We lose stability, we can lose balance, can lose coordination. So that's kind of the long way round again. And part of the Primal Play method is looking at this evolutionary biology, looking at the mechanisms that nature has provided to us in order to perform movement function as we should. So I would certainly say it will be beneficial for you to explore some of these movements without those training shoes. Start off very slowly, start off very gently, relearn how to be the animal you are. And my book, Animal Moves, explores that and discusses that in a bit more detail. But certainly thinking of ourselves as animals, which we are, and thinking about why jumping would be important, but more importantly, why landing would be more important, because we want to be safe. We don't want injury. We want to maintain longevity of our joints, right? We don't want to be smashing our joints and getting arthritic joints before they should. So that's what's important. And so my running has changed. So I'm in pain when I run like I used to be. I can sprint now. I can wear minimalist shoes pretty much all of the time now. and it's far more beneficial for me. I'm not clumsy anymore. I used to fall, I was the kind of kid that would always trip up over themselves when walking. I was so clumsy, and I felt that's just the way that it was, just 2 left feet, and no, it was just because I just didn't really think about what I was doing. And as soon as you start thinking about it and recognizing how you should be moving, it's amazing how everything falls into place. So yes.
I love that slant of thinking about how you're landing rather than the actual jump, because I'm often like, I'm not jumping high enough, but I don't think I ever think about how I land.
Yes. Always think, how soft did I land? How did that feel? How did the landing feel, and how soft was it? So the audible aspect as well as the physical soft. So if you land softly and you don't hear much of a sound, perfect. And if you literally just leave the ground and achieve that, perfect. Because then you can work on increasing the height. And that's what I would suggest. So, there's nothing impressive about jumping higher, jumping far, if you're landing significantly, letting gravity do all of the work, right? Just like a third to the ground. When you're fighting against gravity, when you're adjusting your body to position yourself to land softly, I suppose just to finish this point, I know we're kind of exceeding time a little bit, but if you look at a cat landing in slow motion, right, and you slow it down, when they land, they will kind of be like a shock absorber. So they won't just land, like this, right? There'll be a little bit of a cushion. When humans land, sometimes they will literally land like so. There'll be none of these shock absorbance. And that's almost what you're trying to do. You're trying to almost be like a spring. And that takes away the pressure from the joints. Mm. So our muscles should be the shock absorbers, not the joints, which is, unfortunately for many humans, it's the other way around. Their joints become the shock absorbers. And that's why we have issues with the ankles and the knees and the hips, because they're performing the role of shock absorption when it actually should be the muscle and the soft tissue that performs that role. So hopefully that kind of explains the principle of jumping and landing, and it works for running as well. Slowing down is just as important as, say, sprinting. Deceleration is important as acceleration. Being balanced while you run is also important, So why do we run like so, right? When actually we should be running more like so, being more efficient, more in control, more stable. So that argument extends to all of our movement patterns.
Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed talking to you today.
You're welcome, Avni. Thanks so much. You've been a great host. Amazing questions. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please send me a comment on Twitter or Instagram at Avni Touch. Subscribe to Speak from the Body on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Go to avni-touch.com/podcast to get the show notes. And finally, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.